Hello and welcome to Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started. Our catalyzing statement is a successful entrepreneur inside of every business. Enjoy this module. Welcome to Module 2, Management by Objectives. And I've got to tell you, this was a huge one for me. I mean, they're all big, but this one was so life-changing in the way of clarifying exactly what we want to accomplish. It took so much stress out of the management process as far as dealing with people, dealing with employees, dealing with what you're trying to get done. And we're really saying this as compared to management by task, right? Get this done, get that done. Instead of saying manage a task, here's the objective. You figure out the tasks to make that happen.
Yes, but let me take it a step back first. A lot of people, when they hear management by objectives, they think, well, I already know what that is, or I've heard that before, or doesn't Peter Drucker talk about that? Right. So oftentimes, I like to refer to this first as finding your catalyzing statement. Right. Now, what is a catalyzing statement? Let me walk you through the process. First, by defining the word catalyze. I remember in 7th grade chemistry class, a catalyst was something, by virtue of the fact that it enters into the situation, something else happens. As an example, a flame can be considered a catalyst that makes water boil. The flame isn't actually going in the water to make it boil, but it's an outside effect that's heating water, and as soon as water gets to the next degree, which I believe is 212 degrees Fahrenheit, water begins boiling. So you could say that the flame is a catalyst for the water boiling. Well, let me tell you what a catalyzing statement is. And I'm going to do it by way of example. And this is really powerful, so I want you to pay attention here. When John F. Kennedy became President of the United States had the objective or the purpose of becoming the world's best space program. Now, for those that have studied history, we were competing with the Russians in those days, and who was going to win the space race. So that was a worthy purpose, to create the world's best space program. Think about that. That's a good purpose, right? Well, let's add a statement that's a catalyst and use this catalyzing statement in place of a purpose. Let me give an example of what was so genius about what John F. Kennedy did. Instead of we're going to build the world's best space program, he said, we will send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade of the 60s. And he said that in 1962.
Right.
Now, what did that one statement catalyze? Thousands upon thousands of engineers who may not have been motivated by the statement called purpose, we're going to build the world's best space program, but who got totally motivated by the catalyzing statement, we're going to send the man to the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade of the 60s. Here's the unbelievable thing about a really well-written catalyzing statement. John F. Kennedy died several months after he made that statement, and it still happened. If you, as a business owner, can think about a catalyzing statement, and again, you'll hear this theme over and over and over, and that is taking time out of your day to think about, where am I going? But imagine if you could create something as powerful as we're going to send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth. You don't have to worry so much about all the stresses and strains that normal business people worry about. It's so funny when someone tells me they got a business idea, and what do they worry about when they have a business idea? They worry about, oh, I got to get an office, an internet connection, a telephone, I have to hire some employees, I have inventory, I got to create marketing. No, you need to figure out exactly what your purpose is and take it a step further. Create a catalyzing statement. And the better the catalyzing statement, the more action that occurs. Antonio Santi was an Italian guy who came up with this phrase. I love it, or quote. Some people say phrase, some people say quote. He said, a massive project is easier to accomplish than a small project. I agree with that statement, especially when you have a catalyzing statement as powerful as John F. Kennedy's. Okay, let's go back to 1962 when John F. Kennedy said those famous words. Do you realize that in 1962 there were technologies that did not exist that needed to come into creation, and that catalyzing statement allowed that to happen? Do you also realize there were materials that didn't exist? There were people that didn't even know they had to learn certain aspects of technology, and they had to do it all in 8 years. That's the power of a catalyzing statement.
And that's actually, I think, what gives it its power, is saying we're looking to do something that is somewhat unprecedented. And it's something that captures your imagination, something that people would see as important, necessary, maybe even majestic. So it can't be kind of a bland thing that has been done over and over again. It's got to catalyze people. And that is true about that whole, I'm a big fan of the whole space race. I've kind of gone back and read about a bunch about that. But recognizing nobody's ever gone to the moon and come back. And I think the word carefully, safely. We're going to get a man to the moon and back safely. And people said, because that was a big part of the value. That's a part of the value of the statement, that we can do this. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we know that we can do it somehow. And it catalyzed thousands of engineers and captured the imagination of the whole world, especially the American public, in recruiting into that vision, that catalyzing statement.
Now, the interesting thing and how this applies is all of us, every one of us who has a business or an entity that we're in charge of, we can create a catalyzing statement. Why not? I often ask people, why not? Why not try to find the best employees that completely value what you value and believe in where you're headed? Why not take time out of your life to come up with a powerful statement that tells the world where you're going? And I want to give you some more examples of some powerful catalyzing statements. Some you may agree with and some you won't. But the reason I'm giving you these examples is because I want you and your employees to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Wouldn't it be interesting if everybody involved in your company loved coming to work? Now, if you worked for Federal Express, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight, do you think there's one employee at Federal Express that didn't understand why they were going to work in the morning? They were going to work in the morning because it absolutely positively had to be there overnight. That's a crystal clear example of a catalyzing statement for a company, and you could come up with your own.
And incidentally, just on that, think about it. If you're an employee of Federal Express and you know the catalyzing statement, which you would because they've stated it publicly, you suddenly the idea of that's not my job, or if a package somehow is not going to make it and you know that, you don't just passively say, well, it's not my responsibility. You know it's not management by your task. There's an objective here. It positively, absolutely has to get there overnight. You find a way. Everybody takes responsibility for achieving that objective that's so brilliantly stated.
Yeah.
Bill Gates is another one that you bring up.
I love Bill Gates. Now think about Bill Gates when he started Microsoft. He had a vision of creating the world's most recognizable software company. And if he hired you at the beginning, you would have said, wow, this is really cool. We're working for the world's best software company. Well, at the time, that was an arbitrary purpose because who knew if they were the best or not? But then he changed it into a catalyzing statement when he said, I envision a world with a computer on every desktop. Now, all of a sudden, every employee knew why they were going to work. And more importantly, the whole world knew what their purpose was. They catalyzed action. Everybody knew exactly where Microsoft wanted to go. You can do the same thing. As we said earlier, our promise is to make sure that we're giving you things that you could put on the ground tomorrow. It may not always be easy, but it's very straightforward. So please to take the time when you're going through your homework to really think through this. I want to give you a couple more examples so this really hammers home. Volvo, although I don't like how it's stated really, but still, when you go to work for Volvo, at least up till about 15 years ago, they've gotten off of this, but they said very clearly, we build the safest cars in the world. And they did that by any measure. They would say, test our cars in different scenarios. The point is, if you were an engineer and you worked for Volvo, your number one consideration was safety. Another one, 30 minutes or less. What does 30 minutes or less mean to you? Some of you are probably thinking, I have no idea. But if you worked for Domino's Pizza in the 80s, you knew that that hot pizza had to be delivered in 30 minutes or less. That was what that company stood for. And again, we all have the opportunity to create a catalyzing statement, which is where management by objectives starts.
So, and incidentally, Domino's created a huge business in a very competitive market by distinguishing themselves with that statement. It was look at the simplicity of the statement. You'll be talking about simplicity in another module. That's a whole other one. But nonetheless, the simplicity of a statement that takes a competitive marketplace and takes Domino's and has it stand out like a giant amongst any of the competitors that were there. You need to be doing that also, and you can be doing that.
Okay, so now let me tie this to management by objectives. What really is management by objectives? Well, as you'll see, as a business person, whether it's your business or when you look at other people's businesses, most people approach business in a random way. They come to work in the morning and they're putting out fires all day long. They don't get their head above water. They've got emails coming in, faxes coming in, mail, clients, interruptions. Because they don't have crystal clear objectives of where the business is going, everything is always on defense. They're never really playing offense. And so how management by objectives needs to be implemented in the company is, I'm going to go at a very high level, and this will all become clear in your homework, is at the beginning of every calendar year, it works best to do it on a calendar year basis, the management team of the business, if you don't have a management team, it could be you by yourself, you come up with a list of 5. I like 5 because 5 is easy to manage. 5 important objectives. You ask yourself this question: if I was sitting here in my office on December 31st of this year, and I look back over my year, what 5 important things would really make my year the best year of my career and of the business's life? And those are the 5 objectives that the whole company needs to embrace. And I don't care if you're by yourself or you have 1,000 employees. You start with management by objectives. Now, I want to take them to an example of a very interesting conversation I had. I'm very passionate about meeting successful people. And I have a mentor who has sold 6 companies for more than $1 billion. And one time I was having lunch with him, and I said, could you give me a secret? We all want secrets. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of you listening are wondering, what's the next secret? Well, the truth is there aren't a lot of secrets to business success. Most of the time it takes hard work, it takes determination, and it takes learning some of the principles that we're teaching here. But he leaned in across the table and he looked over his shoulders like this, and this was a 70-year-old guy, and he had a twinkle in his eye.
He's a billionaire.
He's a billionaire. He sold 6 companies for more than $1 billion. Each. Very wealthy guy. And he looked over his shoulder and he said, management by objectives. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, here's how we did it in our culture. He said, we would come up with a list of 5 objectives for the company. And at the beginning of each quarter, we would come up with 5 quarterly objectives that align with the 5 annual objectives. Think about that. You've laid out your 5 annual objectives. Now at the beginning of every quarter, you sit down with your executives. You could be on off-site, you could be in the company, but it has to be a rhythmic situation. The beginning of every quarter, okay, let's sit down and let's figure out what our objectives are for the quarter that align with the annual objectives. And here's what made it interesting. His twinkle in his eye was, if I ever encountered an employee of any of my companies that didn't have their objectives in their card, in their pocket, whether it was their pants pocket or shirt pocket, when I asked them for it, they would be fired on the spot. Could you imagine that?
Yeah.
Think about that. The culture was so ingrained with management by objectives that you were fired if you weren't walking around with your 5 objectives. Think about you right now as you're sitting here. There are 5 important things that you need to get done. Imagine if all of the accountability around you, your boss, your owners, your employees, everybody knew, hey, that's what Rick has to get done. That's powerful because you're waking up every morning and you know exactly what you're going to be held accountable to, which leads to our accountability group,
right,
which I think you should share.
Well, this has been a major part of our experience in the accountability group. We are on the phone religiously. I mean, there is no excuses for missing the call. That's a part of accountability for 90 minutes every week. And we're in 3 different parts of the country, sometimes different parts of the world, depending on our travel. But I travel over 150,000 miles a year. my time is booked, and my assistant knows never book me in a place where I can't be on a phone during that period every single week. So it's a standing thing. Doesn't matter if it's a holiday, doesn't matter. We're just there. So the point is that on these calls, one of the things that we review every single week are our objectives. And we have annual objectives and we have quarterly objectives. And in our particular situation, we break them down to personal objectives and business objectives. And when you are on a call every week with people who are charged to hold you accountable to get those objectives done, let me tell you, you're getting them done. You are not getting distracted. You're not getting pulled away from your objectives. You're pushing things away from you that take you away from making those objectives happen.
When people are introduced to this topic, it often goes in one ear and out the other. They say, oh, I'm doing that, or I tried writing goals down, or New Year's resolutions don't work. I want to make sure you understand the most successful companies in the world, and I don't care if you look at Microsoft or Apple or Southwest Airlines or any company like that, they all employ management by objectives. And the interesting thing about management by objectives is this. Once you're crystal clear on what your objectives are for a year or a quarter, anything new that comes into your life then becomes something that goes into a parking lot. So you're not constantly reacting to opportunities. Right. And this all ties together. You've heard now about the doorman principle. You've heard about values-based decision making. It all works together. Having a preset set of criteria and set of objectives by which all decisions are made. Now, let's take it to each employee. One of the things that I love the companies to do is have employee reviews. But we all know that employee reviews are typically ineffective. Think about if your employee review went something like this. Hi, Bob. I'm here for your employee review. This employee review would only take about 10 minutes. Fair enough? Sure, that's fair enough. At the beginning of the quarter, if you remember, Bob, I showed you the company's quarterly objectives. And you then picked 5 objectives of your own that align with the company's quarterly objectives. Let's see how you did on those. All of a sudden, Bob's like, oh yeah, we did? We sat down? I don't remember what those are. Now imagine if you instilled that in the culture, and at the beginning of the quarter you said, Bob, we're going to come up with 5 objectives that align with the quarterly objectives, and at the end of the quarter, I'm going to sit down with you for 10 minutes, and if you hit all 5 of your objectives, I'm going to give you $5,000. Now, would that change your culture? If every single employee in your business had 5 objectives that align with the company's quarterly objectives, which align with the company's annual objectives, which align with the company's catalyzing statement, how long do you think it would take for your company to be on the trajectory of success?
So let me ask you this. What makes a good objective? In other words, people say, well, are they generic? Are they specific? What makes a good objective?
Well, let's go to the individual perspective first. If I'm an executive in a business and the owner of the company wants to employ management by objectives and compensate me if I achieve my objectives personally, what do I want to know that my owner is holding me accountable to? I would like each one of my objectives to be very specific, very measurable. I want them to be attainable. Even if it was a stretch goal, it would have to be attainable. It would have to be something that's realistic, and it would have to be tangible. In other words, time-bound or number-bound. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and tangible. And that's known as a SMART goal, S-M-A-R-T. So I would want all 5 of my objectives to be SMART. The worst thing is, as an example, I'm going to use a personal example. When you pick goals in your marriage, let's say I have a friend who said, hey, will you hold me accountable to being a better dad? I'm like, well, no, I can't hold you accountable because it's not smart. What I can hold you accountable to is taking your daughter out on daddy-daughter date night at least once a week for 2 hours. That I can hold you accountable. That's very specific. It's very measurable. Either you did it or you didn't do it. It's time-bound. It's every single week. It's realistic, and it's tangible. So you could take almost any goal and make it SMART. And so I would encourage you, when you're going through the homework for this module, to make all your goals SMART. It's so interesting. I was at a company last week, and they showed me their annual goals as the company, and they had worked with me for a while, and all 5 of the company's goals were not SMART. It was the most bizarre thing I ever saw in my life. They couldn't even tell if they achieved the goals or they didn't. Get better at customer service. How can you measure that?
Right.
So they had horrible goals. So what's another way to use that as an example
And you're
here?
using the term goal and objective kind of interchangeably.
Yeah, so I may say goal, I may say objective. But the reality here is get better at customer service. How about this as a goal? Every salesperson every day calls 5 customers randomly and asks them about their experience of service with your business. Now, is that objective? Sure. Every salesperson every day calls 5 people and reports back to management. That's a way of taking a randomly organized goal and making it SMART.
Or if they were to say, we do customer satisfaction surveys, and right now we're coming back with a rating of 77. We want to make it 85. So that now when we survey our customers, we get at least an 85% positive ranking, something like that.
Exactly. So you want to be very careful to have SMART goals all the time. And one of the things I often see is when companies start embarking on this process of turning to a management by objectives culture, they think that it's better to have kind of soft goals. But here's what happens when you have soft goals, and I've seen this hundreds of times. You're meeting with your employee is unhappy because your employee is, maybe not getting the job done, or their boss is saying, hey, pick it up. But the reality is, employees rarely, I love this quote, rarely have a motivation problem. They always typically have a compensation problem. And the compensation should be directly tied to what they get done. In a management by objectives culture, everybody knows A, where the company's going, B, what SMART goals that they need to do to get the company to its goals, and C, they have a way for the employee to interact with their boss. If I'm coming to work every day and I know exactly what I'm being held accountable to, guess what? I'm a more fully engaged employee. Guess what else? The company will be more successful.
Well, and I think the setup of it is good because you're looking at first a catalyzing statement which energizes and basically says, wow, this is a great vision, I want to enroll. And incidentally, you've probably seen the surveys, I've read the articles on it in business magazines. People, when surveyed, employees, would take less money to work in a job that they liked or were passionate about rather than more money in a job that they didn't like. Mm-hmm. So I'd keep that in mind. So now if you match the passion of a catalyzing statement with benefits of saying if I achieve or get my work done as agreed to before, the objectives are agreed to, let's say a quarterly objective at the beginning of the quarter, not in the middle or the end. And if I'm the employee, I'm saying, okay, I accept these objectives, meaning I can do this. If it's unrealistic, at that point I could say, I don't think that's a realistic goal to set for me, and here's why. But now I'm agreeing to it. Now I'm held accountable, and there's the carrot and the stick, I'd imagine. It is the bonus if you actually achieve the objectives, and in some instances, say if somebody's consistently missing their objectives, they're asked to leave.
Exactly. Now, one thing that people often say to themselves as business managers or owners is, well, I have some employees, like a receptionist, that they don't really have those kinds of goals. And I say that's nonsense. There is not an employee in any organization that you can't come up with 5 very specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and tangible goals for them to be more fully engaged. Isn't the objective to have fully engaged employees helping with you with your cause? Think about that. Now, if you really want to learn more about this topic and a fresh perspective on management by objectives, there's an interesting book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. And they give a lot of examples in there on ways you could really push management by objective into your organization. But earlier we talked about catalyzing statement and then 5 annual goals for your company and then employee goals. One thing that Vern talks about, and I agree with, is when you're meeting with your staff at the beginning of a quarter to announce your quarterly objectives, you want to give them a reward at the end of the quarter. So it could be something like this to your employees. If the company achieves all of the objectives that we've outlined here, these 5, A, we're going to have a big party at the pizzeria, and your Entire families are invited. It's going to be a 5-hour afternoon event. We're going to have clowns. We're going to have games if you achieve the goal. We're also going to give every employee a $1,000 bonus. So now you've created a reward for everybody, and people like team-based awards and an individual bonus. So when you announce those objectives, you say, is anybody not clear on the 5 objectives of the company? And they're all sitting there, and they're going to tell you if they're not clear, so you clear it up for them. Is anybody not clear about the reward that we're going to get if we achieve it? This type of culture works magic because now your employees become catalysts for change and catalysts for positive energy.
And hold each other accountable now because there's something in it for them that if I'm getting my objectives done but you're not on top of it, I might say, hey, don't screw up here because you're going to cost me the $1,000 in the party.
Right.
I want to see, so there's basically built-in accountability with that. I can also talk about, incidentally, just my own personal experience. This was really liberating for me in several ways. Not that long ago, I hired a CEO for my companies. And I was always reticent to do that because it'd be like, well, how do I know if it's really going well? How do I know that I have the right person? Will they do this right? Will they do that right? And of course, I after running my company, starting them from scratch and running them for over 20 years, you have certain ways that you do things and certain ways that the company does things. So to try to turn that over to somebody, it's very difficult because you see how the tasks should get done, shouldn't get done, are they doing this right? And you have to watch it. It was not a stress reliever to try to bring in a CEO, somebody who could replace me. It became something that created more stress because I had the stress of the company plus the stresses if this person is doing things the way that I think they should be done. When I learned this principle from Rick, and he really helped me through this with the specific situation that I was working toward, where I wanted to make not a career change necessarily, but change in my role and what my daily activities were. I wanted to be less of an operator and get more creative on other entrepreneurial things. And I needed a CEO to run my existing companies to be able to do that. And I have to tell you, here was the most liberating conversation in my life. I sit with the person who's the candidate. I explain what the job is. I say that I think they've earned a shot at it because they were in my company for years. If they would like the shot, answer is yes. I'd say, I am not 100% sure you're the right person for this job yet or not, but here's how it's going to go. We are going to sit and agree on 5 objectives right now. And it was June, so I said, if these objectives by December 31st are accomplished, I will know you're the right person for the job. And if they are not accomplished, I don't want to have hard feelings with you, but I will know that you're not the right person for this job, and we're going to take it away. If you'll agree to these objectives with me, we go, and then I could walk away, and I'm not worried about how the objectives are getting done. I just know that there's a person now responsible for making sure that they do get done, and I can easily judge, is it the right or wrong person? It's this simple. Were the 5 objectives hit, or were they not hit? Stress relieving and liberating like I can't even tell you.
How do you think, as a listener, people like Warren Buffett, who owns 90 companies, people like Richard Branson, who owns over 300 companies, how do you think they could be stress-free without management by objectives? But it's so often that small business entrepreneurs, they feel like it's their duty to take on all the burdens of the company, and all decisions have to be made by me, and nobody understands the company like I do. You know what the reality is? That's so debilitating to a culture. I call that the Superman syndrome. I walk into a company, I could tell instantly if a company has a boss that's got Superman syndrome. And people actually think that's the way a company should be run. Why? Why do you want the stress and burdens of all your employees? Don't you want your employees doing all your heavy lifting? So you could be like Richard Branson, who hangs on an island in the British Virgin Islands for 6 months out of the year and owns 300 companies? Think about that. There's a quote that I shared with Patrick 2 years ago, and it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said this. And it actually took me a couple of years before I understood what this quote meant. But Patrick and I, from a philosophical level, have debated this quote and thought about this quote and, called each other late at night when we really thought of a new nuance to this quote. But you want to take a shot at the quote? Do you remember what it is?
Sure, I could tell you the quote. The quote is this. And incidentally, we have an entire module on this, so don't worry about that. You have to try to get it right now. We're going to spend a whole module on it because it's that important. But the quote is simply this. I wouldn't give a fig for simplicity on this side of complexity. However, I'd give my life for simplicity on the far side of complexity. Was that it?
That's it. So think about it. I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity. Think of someone who lives a very simple life, maybe a bum on the street. They're on this side of complexity. But I give my life for the simplicity on this side of complexity. Think of Warren Buffett, who plays bridge for 4 hours a day and reads for 8 hours a day. Think about that. He reads. He's got 90,000 employees, and the guy's reading. I mean, think about that.
Or Branson hanging out on the British Virgin Islands on his own little private island there with over 250, 300 companies that are running, that are his companies. So, or for me at this point saying, listen, I've got companies now. I show up to the office twice a month. Twice a month I show up to the office. So it's managing by objectives and being able to delegate responsibility based on those objectives just is the most freeing thing you could ever possibly do, because it gives people responsibility. They have objectivity as to what it is that they need to accomplish. It frees you up to check in and just see, are the objectives being met or not? And there's no wiggle room to say, where you have excuses. Well, this didn't go well, or this task isn't going the way I thought it should be. There's none of that. It's either got done or it didn't. It's a very black and white way to manage. And I have to tell you, for me, it's been transformational. And if you had said to me before Rick taught this to me, having goals or managing by objectives, of course, everybody does that. It's a normal thing. There's a difference between hearing it as a phrase and putting it to work, putting it on the ground in your business, in your life, in a meaningful way, in the way that we're describing, and then having built-in accountability related to those objectives. Now that's transformational. That's not just kind of the vogue term for the week and then you forget about it. It becomes a culture that's built on this, and it's transformational, not only for you, but for the people who work in your business.
Having interacted in my life with thousands of business owners, because as a holding company chief executive officer, I have to look at a lot of companies before we invest in one. And over the past 17 years in my role, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of employees and executives. And what's interesting, what I find almost universally, is that people look at business success as the next great idea or the next great strategy or the next guru who's going to come in and save marketing or the next call where somebody's going to buy your company for $5 million. The reality is it's the rhythm and consistency and management by objectives and having the meeting every quarter to decide on the quarterly objectives and having the employee reviews and having the management meetings weekly to see if we're on track or off track and doing the adjustments, and as important as all of that, saying no to new opportunities when you've already decided what your objectives are. That is absolutely destructive to a company. This happens in entrepreneurial Superman companies all the time. I'll sit down with an executive team, we'll go off-site, we'll agree on what the objectives are for either the quarter or the year, and a week later I'll get an email from the CEO to the whole company that says, oh, by the way, I've decided to pursue this opportunity, or I've decided to hire a new marketing company. Time out. You can't do that. A, that's completely discrediting all your employees and all their hard work and the management team's hard work. But number two, it's a new opportunity that wasn't agreed on in advance, and all you're doing is creating chaos in the culture. This particular individual who did this to me, after we had agreed on everything, said, wait a minute, you don't understand. I'm the owner of the business. Yeah, you're the owner of the business. And what I often find is that the owners are the most destructive people in an organization.
There's an old adage, actually, and I'm guilty as charged right here. I mean, I could tell you, the biggest challenge I am to my own businesses is the fact that I've got an idea, I got an opportunity, I own the business, and everybody, because I might say, hey, we should do this, they don't want to look at me and say, we're not doing that. But now I have the right person who will look at me and say, we're not doing that for all the right reasons. But there's an old adage is that the owner's strength is the company's weakness. When you found your own business and you're working in it for a period of time and you've done it your own way, you will hit a wall eventually as to what you're capable of getting done. But it's your strength that got it there, but it's also now the weakness to prevent the company from breaking through and going to other places. So you just have to recognize that. And again, this doesn't matter if it's you and one other employee or if it's you and 1,000 other employees. It starts with you. And then you become, if you're the only employee in your business right now, then you have your own objectives and you play by those rules. And then when you start to add employees, you now have the rules and you have the rhythms, and now you can translate those into new people that you bring on board. So these aren't just rules for a scale organization. These are rules for a single proprietor up to the biggest companies in the world, and it's a be-do-have thing. Meaning, see, some people say, well, when I have more employees, then I'll start to do that. Right now, it's just me and a couple of part-timers. No, you will never have the big company until you apply this first, and then you will have. So it's be this first, do these things, and then in the end, you have the bigger growing company.
Yeah. I want to also add to everyone listening that you can apply this to your marriage. You could apply this to your relationship with your kids. You could apply this to your relationship with your siblings. This isn't only about business. Management by objectives is an accountability system for you. Use it any way you want. And remember what we've said earlier in an earlier module. As an entrepreneur, someone who has that gene, whether you have your own business or you're thinking about having your own business or you're a student listening, because remember, we're sponsoring students for this program. You don't want to be addicted to yes. Could you imagine walking around like most of us do and saying yes to everything in light of what you just learned? Why would you do that? Stop the addiction to yes. Pick a path and go.
Okay, so now let's get into some applications for applying these principles. So Rick, we started with values-based decision making, the doorman principle. Now we're talking about management by objectives and catalyzing statement. So let's start here. If a business person, the person watching us right now, has a mission statement and a statement of purpose, how do they take that and try to translate it into a catalyzing statement? And then secondly, if they don't, what should they do?
There's a lot about this topic on your implementation guide. But what a catalyzing statement is really, it's a get to or a manifestation of your purpose. So if Bill Gates, as the example you used prior, if his purpose was to be the world's best software company, well, that's a great purpose, but it was very internal to him. How do you make your purpose manifest throughout the world? You turn it into something that has action oriented around it. So I envision a world with a computer on every desktop. So I want you to think about your purpose or your mission and think about how do you want to manifest it in the world. So here's what I'd like you to do. Imagine that you and I are at a meeting 10 years from today. So why don't you write down the date 10 years from today, whatever that date is. And I want you to imagine that you lived a fully expressed business life. Your business is thriving. You've made your mark on the world. You've lived your purpose. Well, what did your business achieve? Oftentimes when I do this exercise with people, they realize that's my purpose. That's my catalyzing statement. It's all coming together for me. So let's say for an example, you envision 10 years from now that your company is branded all over the world with franchises in every major city, and you see that clearly. Then your catalyzing statement could be, our store is in every city in the world with a population of more than 100,000. That's a catalyzing statement that's more internally focused, but it's crystal clear. So I'm trying to demonstrate to you that if you have your purpose, you want to show what your purpose is manifested into. If you don't have your purpose, you want to find out where are you going to be in 10 years from now if you lived an idealized life. And then you could derive your catalyzing statement from that.
And you might also find that you have a mission statement or a purpose statement for your business, but after listening to some of these modules, maybe you're saying we got to go back to the drawing board with it. A lot of them get stale after a while. You know, I'm around a lot of friends who are business owners and entrepreneurs, and basically 10 years ago they created one. They haven't really revisited it. They haven't really lived into it, and suddenly it doesn't really apply anymore. But again, you know, going through the implementation guide, I think will have a major impact. So Now let's talk about the application. You have a catalyzing statement. We've given you some great examples of catalyzing statements. By now, we've certainly have proposed the importance of the catalyzing statement, because it really does energize you, it energizes the troops, and it energizes all the other stakeholders, your customers, the people of your community, whether that be local community if you're serving it, or the community of whatever industry you're in. But you have a good catalyzing statement, it recruits everybody and energizes them in the right direction. Now, okay, we've got the vision on the horizon, we've got the catalyst in place. The next question is, how do you pick good objectives? Or maybe we could start with, Rick, how would you differentiate a good objective as far as the way it's structured versus a not so good objective?
Many of you have heard the word SMART goals. SMART is S-M-A-R-T, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and tangible. That's how I define it. And it's so much more important that your goal is structured in a smart way than it is that it's random. So the example I love to use on a personal level is I talk to people, and oftentimes they say, I want a better relationship with my spouse. Well, what does that mean? I want a better relationship with my spouse. How about making it smart and saying that every Tuesday night we will go out to dinner at the same restaurant at 6 p.m. and we've organized our babysitter to come over. So think about turning a very nebulous goal into something that's very specific and measurable. But having said that, what I'd like you to do is imagine yourself 12 months to the day from today. So you're listening to this module, today is a certain date, imagine 1 year from now. What would have had to happen in your business for you to feel like you had the most successful year of your life, business-wise? You want to do the same exercise on your personal side and turn it into 5 objectives on the business side and 5 objectives on the personal side. Now, you want to think about this and be fluid in this conversation, so when you meet with your spouse on the personal side, if you don't have a spouse, friends, family, whomever that you deal with, and on the business side, you want to meet with your executive team or your vendors or your outsourced resources like your outsourced consulting, whomever is involved in your business. You then want to have a meeting, both business and personal, and decide what are our 5 objectives for the next 12 months, and make sure they are smart. This is for the business to achieve. Now, what's ironic about that is once you have your 5 objectives, and let's just focus on business from this point forward, you then want to make sure that all of the stakeholders in your business, your vendors, your employees, your clients, they know about what these objectives are, but more importantly, they help you achieve them. So let's look at, as an example, let's say you have a personal assistant. Wouldn't it be important that the 5 objectives that you choose for your personal assistant fully align with your annual objectives as the company, and they fully align with your overriding purpose and catalyzing statement? I am telling you that this is the most powerful thing you could possibly implement in your business to make you more successful and to have you manifest those 3 words: probability, simplicity, and leverage.
To a large extent, this is engineering.
Yeah.
I mean, and Rick, in his educational background, I mean, his undergraduate degree is in engineering.
Yeah.
I'm not an engineer. Most entrepreneurs probably aren't. We're a little bit more of those wacky right brain people with creative ideas and a lot of energy behind them, with some left brain aspects too. This I know from personal experience. When you start to try to get all these objectives to start at the top and line up in the way that you're describing right now, this is really some deep work, but the impact it has by taking a step back, getting out of all of the chaos, and engineering through this process is magical for the business. Now, one of the things that you were very helpful with me was, okay, well, I need to try to figure out where do I even start to think about objectives? I mean, how do I try to narrow it to 5, et cetera, et cetera? And you started directing me, different places in the business. Look at your balance sheet, for example. Look at your staff and employees. Look, and you started to direct me to different parts of the business to start analyzing this, to come up with ideas for what objectives should I be picking. I think that'd be a terrific asset for people in this application section to learn about. So can you explain that?
What I want you to learn from this program, the whole program, is that You want to build a company that lasts a long time. And you could always sell that company and someone else could take it from here, so to speak. But the fact of the matter is, don't you want to build a thriving enterprise? And all too often I find that small entrepreneurs and even large ones focus on sales and marketing to the detriment of everything else. So when you're looking at the objectives to pick for your company over over the course of a year, you're looking for 5 objectives, you want to think about, let's focus on our balance sheet. What can we do on that side of the business to create a good objective? Or what about the aspect of creating wealth personally? I want to increase the value of the stock. Maybe the capital structure of the business needs to be changed. You've talked to your lawyer or accountant. Maybe there's an objective there. There's some new products that we've talked about and we've tossed around. Maybe we could have an objective there. How about talent? How are we doing on the talent front? You don't want to have to look for talent, new employees, when you're desperately in need because someone was fired. No, maybe one of your objectives could be around creating a bench. A bench is a list of qualified employees that are working for somebody else that you could tap into. So there's all these different buckets. I look at expenses. Maybe we could have an objective cutting our expenses by 50%. Maybe we could have an objective that we're going to cut our percentage of expense relative to each dollar in revenue. So what I would like you to do as a result of this application portion of the module is think about the various buckets of your business. Maybe there's a legal issue that you're putting off. Maybe there's an executive or a situation you need to unwind from. Look at all those various buckets and then pick objectives that span the company versus just being focused on sales and marketing.
And I think to the point of the engineering and how it trickles down, because you'd say, there's the top level objectives, but these have to trickle down to other people in the organization and align somehow. So just to go back to the example, maybe the business leader, as the business leader, is looking at the balance sheet and saying, I want to improve the current ratios of the company. And here's what I want to do. I want to improve the current ratio from X to Y. Okay, great. Now that that's the top level objective, now you've got to go to other people, which would include sales and marketing. And with the sales and marketing people, they might say, hey, you know what? We need to achieve this sales objective in order for our current ratios to get here. Maybe you're going to your CFO and saying, we've got to get our expenses controlled or paid down or whatever needs to be done to be able to get to that current ratio to Y over here. And now that one objective starts to give other people their objectives, which will then keep trickling down, and everything lines up with that top level objective. And what's amazing about this, I mean, it's like, I think of it in terms of like, all the molecules or all the atoms are lining up in a common direction and flowing properly in that direction rather than conflicting and having chaos around them, is that when you start with those top level objectives, which will be the business leader's 5 for the year, then it trickles down to all other aspects of the organization, and alignment creates flow and momentum and energy. And there's that old adage in business that momentum cures everything. Even though I know that it's a lot of work as far as detailed work to think through, creating momentum from the management by objective side of things is just truly amazing. And you gave examples of addicted to yes. We've talked about this stuff before, where entrepreneurs and business leaders many times are opportunity hounds and they're addicted to yes. But you came up, and it's like almost like you're an addict. And I'm speaking from my own experience, just so you know. I'm not trying to talk too abstractly here. This is my own experience. And when you're sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to discipline myself now, and I'm not going to get distracted, and I'm going to stay on course with this, but you still have that lurking feeling in your gut, like, oh God, I want to do that, and I think I can justify getting it done, but it's taking me off of the objectives I set. But you have this concept of a parking lot. Talk about that, because the parking lot was like the, okay, I don't have to just like black and white. It's either in my life or out of my life. I can park it somewhere for a while I work on these objectives. Talk about that.
Because as business people, we're often opportunity hounds. You want to implement ideas that you come up with immediately. And what I do, and it's been so refreshing in our organization, is whenever a new idea comes up, while we're in the middle of a quarter, or while we're in the middle of a year, if it's a bigger idea, we have a parking lot. We have a parking lot for long-term ideas, and we have a parking lot for short-term ideas. So if somebody comes up to me with an idea that fits our annual objectives, we move it into a parking lot that says future quarterly goals. And when we get to the end of quarter one, as an example, and we're looking for goals for quarter two, we just look there. And my list of future objectives is over 400 items long. I'm never going to do all 400, but at least I'm not carrying it around emotionally or pushing it down on someone in my organization. And oftentimes, because we're the owner and we've got that Superman cape on, we boss our employees around and we tell them, do this, do this, do this. We want our employees to be empowered to say, no, I've got my 5 objectives, they align with the company's 5 objectives, and they align with the catalyzing statement and purpose and values of the business. We're not doing that, we're putting it in the parking lot. You know, Warren Buffett has this quote, which you've heard, the difference between successful people and extremely successful people is that extremely successful people say no to almost everything. In the implementation guide, you're going to find that we created an Excel document. And this Excel document on the bottom has tabs for you, for the company, and for your employees. And when I say for the company, at the top of each tab, you're going to list the company's objectives. And then each Excel sheet has places for quarterly objectives for the employee, monthly objectives for the employee, weekly objectives, etc. It so frees you up. I often say to people that when the frame and the rules are clearly defined, when the frame and the rules are clearly defined, then and only then will creativity flourish. Success will flourish. You've got to have the frame, but too often we're running around like random acts, and we hope that we end up on 2 feet. But why not implement a system like this? This will give you so much leverage. I promise it will be the most leverageable thing that you could possibly implement in your business and in your life.
One of the things that's been added to the implementation guide that I think is a real bonus here, because it ties into the management by objectives, is structuring your life to have built-in accountability. Now, Rick and I have a lot of experience together. As a matter of fact, how we met is through an accountability group where we're on with rituals and rhythms, which you're going to learn about later, but we're on with rituals and rhythms every week in this accountability group. We have sent to each other our objectives, and we manage by those objectives and keep each other accountable to achieving those objectives. So, Rick, why don't you have a lot of experience with accountability groups. Why don't you spend a minute or two talking about that and explaining why you put it into the guide?
Well, first of all, I believe that everybody should be part of some type of accountability group that's outside of your marriage and outside of your business. I've been in an accountability group for over 17 years. The one that Patrick and I are together in, we've been involved in for 2.5 years. And once I implemented into the group this management by objectives philosophy, in which at the beginning of every call when we check in, we update each other on how we're doing on our quarterly goals. 5 business quarterly goals and 5 personal quarterly goals. And I could tell you, I'll say it right here while he's next to me, it was very hard to get the other members of the group along. And you'll find when you try to implement management by objectives into your life and into your culture of your business and your marriage, it's going to be hard to get it going along. But trust me, around the 3rd quarter, they start saying, wow, I'm putting projects into my parking lot. I'm not focused on chaos. I'm focused on simplicity, probability, and leverage. So this stuff really works. Pat's living proof. The rest of the members of our accountability group are living proof, and all the people that have actually implemented this. So I encourage you to have some type of accountability, and there's more about that on the implementation guide. And also, we plan sometime down the road to do a separate bonus section just on accountability groups.
I will tell you that the implementation guide for this module is a monumental achievement in my mind. There's extraordinary tools there, and we obviously encourage you to use the implementation guide and do it every single module for sure. But when you really, this is such foundational work, really has to be put on the ground and applied, and the implementation guide here is especially poignant to help you do that. So make sure you do that work. I think in summarizing all this, because I think the points have been made, and we have this attitude that sometimes we're going to tell you what we told you, and then tell you again, because that's, how people learn. It's how I learn. I know sometimes you got to hear it a few times where finally it rings true. I want to remind you that live these as principles, not as just ideas, but literally these become principles that become the lens from which you see everything and become the pattern that you live through, and then the transformation really happens. And I'll close with a quote that I learned from you on one of our accountability calls, and I wish I could give attribution, but I don't remember where it originally came from. But it said, when purpose is not clear, one cannot distinguish between opportunity and distraction. And I think that's the summary statement for everything that we've been trying to talk about here. Clarify the purpose, manage by objectives, and then all you're doing is moving toward opportunity, and you're not getting distracted. So Rick, I want to say for me personally, thank you for bringing this into my life, these concepts and principles, which I'm still trying to get better and better at every single day of my life. And thank you for bringing this to the world out there.
And in closing, I'd like to say that when I teach this topic, oftentimes people say, oh, I heard about management by objectives. Oh, I'm already doing goals. This is a paradigm shift in your personal life and your business life and your future. So your destiny can be altered when you embrace this. And we look forward to working with you. Please do the implementation guide. Patrick, I love doing this module with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this module of Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started.